Captain Lee Hyun walked slowly through the massive space station, his boots clicking against the metal floor. Around him, aliens from dozens of different worlds rushed back and forth, preparing for the biggest battle in galactic history. Some had 4 arms, others had scales instead of skin, and a few floated in the air without touching the ground at all. He stopped in front of a huge window that showed the darkness of space. Outside, hundreds of warships moved like deadly metal fish through the void. Each ship was longer than a city block and covered with weapons that could destroy entire planets. Their hulls sparkled with energy shields that could stop almost any attack. "Captain Lee," a voice called behind him. He turned to see Admiral Kethvar approaching. The alien commander stood nearly 8 feet tall, with blue skin and 4 powerful arms. 2 extra eyes sat on the sides of his head, giving him a view in all directions. When he spoke, a small device on his collar translated his words into perfect Korean. "Your ship assignment is ready," the admiral said. His tone made it clear he was not happy about giving humans any ship at all. They walked together into a large meeting room filled with officers from many different species. Captain Lee recognized some of them from the briefings. There was Commander Vorthak, a warrior race member who looked like a walking mountain of muscle and fur. Captain Zilandra represented the crystal beings who lived for thousands of years. Each species had sent their best military minds to fight the coming threat. Admiral Kethvar activated a holographic display in the center of the room. It showed a small, ugly ship that looked like it had seen better days decades ago. "This is the Endurance," the admiral announced. "A Vorthan scout vessel, Class D rating. It will be your command, Captain Lee." Captain Lee studied the hologram carefully. The ship was barely 200 meters long, tiny compared to the massive warships he had seen outside. Its hull was dented and patched in several places. The weapon systems looked old and weak. "How many crew members can it hold?" he asked. 200 if they don't mind being crowded," Admiral Kethvar replied. "It was designed for long-range exploration missions, not combat." Lieutenant Kim Soo stepped forward from where she had been standing quietly near the wall. As the chief engineer assigned to the human team, she had been studying the ship's technical details on her data pad. "Sir, this vessel hasn't been in active service for over 50 years, she said politely but firmly. "Most of its systems are outdated by current military standards." Commander Vorthak, the huge warrior, made a sound that might have been laughter. "Which makes it perfect for humans," he said in a voice like rolling thunder. "Your species has been flying through space for less than 300 years. The enemy we face has been destroying civilizations since before your people invented the wheel." Communications Officer Park Jin looked up from his own data pad. "The ship's weapons are 2 generations behind what the main fleet is carrying. The energy output is barely sufficient for defensive purposes." "Exactly right," Admiral Kethvar said, his 4 eyes focusing on the humans with barely hidden amusement. "When the Void Swarm arrives, your role will be simple. Stay at the back of the fleet formation and observe. If the battle goes badly, you can serve as an early warning system for any survivors trying to escape." Captain Lee felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm and professional. "Admiral, our crew is fully trained and ready for combat duty. We could handle a ship with more firepower." The alien commander's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his species. "Captain Lee, let me explain something about the enemy you will face. The Void Swarm has consumed 3 entire star systems. They adapt to any weapon used against them within minutes. Their technology learns and evolves during battle. Ships that have protected entire worlds for centuries become useless scrap metal within hours of engaging them." He gestured to the other alien officers around the room. "Every species here has been fighting wars for thousands of years longer than humanity has existed. Our weapons represent millions of years of military development. Our tactics have been tested in countless battles across the galaxy." Admiral Kethvar leaned forward, his extra eyes making his gaze even more intense. "Your people are brave, Captain Lee. No one questions that. But bravery alone will not stop an enemy that has never known defeat. The best thing you can do is stay out of the way and try not to get everyone killed." Navigator Lee Min had been quietly studying star charts during the conversation. Now he looked up with concern in his eyes. "Sir, I've been reviewing the battle reports from previous swarm encounters. Every engagement follows the same pattern. The enemy analyzes our tactics within the first hour, then systematically destroys everything in their path." "How long do the battles usually last?" Captain Lee asked. 6 to 8 hours, maximum. Never longer." Captain Lee looked around the room at all the alien officers. They were clearly the best military minds their species had to offer. They had advanced technology, superior weapons, and thousands of years of combat experience. And yet, 3-star systems had already fallen to the swarm. "We understand our assignment, Admiral," Captain Lee said finally. "When do we take command of the Endurance?" "Immediately. Intelligence reports suggest the swarm will reach the Kepler Junction in 4 days. We want all ships in position before then." Admiral Kethvar's expression softened slightly. "Captain, I know this seems unfair. But in a battle like this, every ship that survives to carry intelligence back to our home worlds is valuable. Even if that ship cannot fight, it can still serve by witnessing what happens here." As the meeting ended and the various officers returned to their duties, Lieutenant Kim Soo approached her captain. "Sir, I've been thinking about the Endurance. Yes, it's old and weak, but the Vorthan design philosophy was always about flexibility. The ship was built with modular systems and backup pathways for everything. You have an idea?" Kim Soo's slight smile held promise and mischief in equal measure. "I have several ideas, actually. The question is whether our new alien friends are prepared to see what human engineering can do with their cast-off equipment." Captain Lee looked out the window one more time at the mighty fleet preparing for battle. Somewhere among all those powerful warships, the little Endurance waited for its human crew. They had been given the weakest ship in the fleet because everyone expected them to fail. Perhaps it was time to show the galaxy what humans could do when nobody expected them to succeed. The void swarm appeared without warning, dropping out of hyperspace like a dark cloud spreading across the stars. Captain Lee Hyun stood on the bridge of the Endurance, watching his screens as thousands of enemy ships materialized in perfect formation. Each vessel looked alive, its metal surface rippling and changing as he observed it. "Fleet Command is ordering all ships to battle positions," Communications Officer Park Jin reported, his voice steady despite what they were seeing. From their assigned position at the very back of the coalition fleet, the crew of the Endurance had a clear view of the most powerful military force ever assembled. The massive Kethvari dreadnoughts moved forward first, their hulls gleaming with energy shields. Each ship was larger than a small city and armed with weapons that could crack planets. "The big ships are opening fire," Navigator Lee Min announced. Brilliant beams of pure energy lanced across space, striking the lead swarm vessels with enough power to vaporize mountains. For a moment, Captain Lee felt hope. The enemy ships seemed to stagger under the assault. Then something impossible happened. The swarm hulls began to change, their surface becoming mirror-like. The next wave of energy beams simply bounced off harmlessly. "Their armor is adapting," Lieutenant Kim Soo called out from her engineering station. "The quantum cannons aren't working anymore." The Zephyrian carriers launched their fighter wings next. Hundreds of sleek combat craft poured from the massive ships, moving in perfect formation like a school of deadly fish. The enemy responded by growing their own fighters, mechanical horrors that emerged from the larger swarm vessels like insects hatching from eggs. Captain Lee watched in growing horror as the coalition's superior numbers and technology began to fail. Every weapon the fleet fired, every tactic they used, the swarm learned and countered within minutes. "Sir, the enemy fighters are matching our pilots move for move," Lee Min reported. "They're learning our combat patterns in real time." On the main screen, a Kethvari dreadnought that had seemed invincible just minutes before began to break apart. Swarm vessels had somehow learned to phase their weapons through its quantum shielding. The massive ship died in silence, its lights going dark one section at a time. "The flagship is calling for general retreat," Park Jin said, his face pale as he monitored the fleet communications. Captain Lee watched ship after ship fall to the adaptive enemy. The retreat was already becoming a panic. Ships that tried to run were picked off easily, their escape routes predicted by the swarm's learning systems. "Captain, we should fall back with the others," Navigator Lee Min urged. "No." Captain Lee's voice was quiet but firm. "Look at the pattern, Min. Every ship that runs gets destroyed. The swarm learns from each encounter, gets better at hunting down survivors." He turned to face his bridge crew. Around them, the sounds of the fleet's destruction played out on their communication systems. Desperate calls for help, reports of hull breaches, final messages from dying ships. "They adapt to everything because every species in the coalition uses the same technology," Captain Lee continued. "Energy weapons, quantum shields, predictable battle tactics. But they've never fought humans before." The bridge fell silent except for the distant crackling of emergency transmissions. "Sir, with respect, we have the same weapons as everyone else," Park Jin pointed out carefully. "No, we don't." Captain Lee's smile was grim but determined. "We have 2 broken pulse cannons and a cargo hold full of spare parts. Kim, those modifications you've been working on during the trip here, Are they ready? Lieutenant Kim Soo looked up from her engineering displays with sudden understanding lighting her eyes. The improvised kinetic launchers? Sir, they're completely jury-rigged. I can't promise they'll work more than once. Once might be enough. Min, I want you to plot an intercept course with the nearest group of swarm ships. Sir, that's suicide, the navigator protested. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way anyone survives this. Captain Lee activated the ship's internal communications system. All crew, this is your captain speaking. We're about to do something that every military manual says is impossible. We're going to attack the swarm directly, and we're going to use weapons and tactics they've never encountered. He paused, listening to the sounds of his crew preparing for what might be their final battle. The aliens gave us this ship because they thought we were weak and expendable. They were wrong about being weak, but they were right about one thing: we are different. We don't think like them. We don't fight like them. And maybe that's exactly what we need right now. The Endurance slowly turned away from the fleeing coalition fleet and began accelerating toward the heart of the swarm formation. Behind them, the greatest military force in galactic history ran in complete disorder. Ahead of them, an enemy that had never known defeat waited with adaptive technology that could counter any threat. In the engineering sections, Kim Soo put the finishing touches on weapons that violated every safety regulation ever written. On the bridge, Lee Min calculated approach routes that ignored every rule of proper space combat. At his communication station, Park Jin prepared to broadcast signals that would have gotten him arrested in any civilized military. The Endurance was about to teach the galaxy that sometimes the best way to fight an impossible enemy is to refuse to fight the way everyone expects. As the first swarm interceptors moved toward them, Captain Lee Hyun gripped his command chair and smiled. The enemy was about to discover what humans could accomplish when they had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The first swarm interceptors moved toward the Endurance with mechanical precision, their hulls already shifting to counter the energy weapon signatures they expected. What hit them instead was a chunk of metal traveling faster than anything they had ever encountered. Direct hit. Navigator Lee Min shouted as the improvised projectile punched completely through the lead enemy vessel. Their adaptive armor was designed for energy weapons, not simple physics. Lieutenant Kim Soo's excited voice crackled through the ship's speakers from the engineering bay. That was our last piece of good metal, Captain. Switching to the scrap pile. Captain Lee Hyun watched more swarm ships approach, their hulls already beginning to thicken in response to the kinetic threat. The enemy was learning and adapting just like they always did. Kim, how long before they figure out how to stop our metal chunks? Maybe 10 minutes, based on their learning speed. Then we change tactics in 9 minutes. Captain Lee opened a channel to every section of the ship. All departments, start plan chaos. I want every crazy weapon system we discussed ready in 5 minutes. Communications Officer Park Jin looked up from his station with barely hidden excitement. Sir, should I begin the noise attack? Do it now. What happened next would confuse military historians for decades. The Endurance began broadcasting on every frequency at once. Korean folk songs mixed with heavy metal music, cooking shows explaining how to make traditional soup, mathematical lessons about impossible numbers, and philosophical debates about the meaning of life. The swarm's communication networks, built to process tactical information quickly and efficiently, suddenly found themselves drowning in complete nonsense that made no logical sense. At the same time, Kim Soo's engineering teams deployed weapons that no proper military would ever approve. Chemical explosives made with actual gunpowder, technology so old that the swarm's computers initially ignored it as harmless. Their learning systems don't know what to do with ancient human weapons. Kim Soo reported with obvious joy. They're trying to develop space-age defenses against fireworks. Navigator Lee Min threw the ship into a series of movements that broke every rule of space combat. Instead of smooth, efficient turns designed to keep weapons aimed at targets, the Endurance flew like a crazy bird, spinning, diving, sometimes flying backward for no reason anyone could understand. The swarm vessels, with their computers trying to predict where the human ship would go next, found themselves constantly wrong. Every calculation failed because the Endurance seemed determined to waste fuel and expose itself to enemy fire. Sir, we're completely confusing their targeting systems, Lee Min reported while pulling the ship through another impossible turn. They're designed to predict logical behavior. Perfect. Let's get more illogical. Captain Lee turned to Park Jin. Are they responding to our broadcasts? Sir, I'm detecting massive computer activity from the swarm network. They're trying to analyze and categorize everything we're sending them. It's clogging up their communication systems. On the main screen, the swarm formation began to show signs of problems. Ships that should have been working together in perfect coordination started hesitating. Their movements became less smooth as their shared intelligence struggled to understand the chaos being broadcast at them. Kim Soo's voice came through the speakers again. "Captain, we're out of metal scraps. Moving to Phase 3 of our plan." "What's Phase 3? Lee Min asked while avoiding another enemy attack. "Improvised chemical weapons. Specifically, we're shooting our garbage at them." The bridge crew stared at each other for a moment. "You're using our trash as ammunition?" Park Jin asked in disbelief. "Everything from kitchen waste to used air filters. The swarm analyzes whatever hits their ships, trying to develop defenses. They're about to waste valuable computer power figuring out how to protect themselves against human garbage." Captain Lee couldn't help but laugh despite their desperate situation. "Fire when ready." The next wave of swarm attackers found themselves being pelted with everything from food scraps to dirty cleaning rags. Their adaptive systems, designed to counter sophisticated weapons, began developing armor specifically designed to repel refuse. "Sir," Lee Min called out, studying his long-range sensors, "something's happening to the main swarm fleet. They're slowing down." On the sensor display, the massive enemy formation that had been systematically destroying the coalition forces was showing signs of serious problems. Ships were clustering together in confused groups instead of maintaining their usual perfect coordination. "They're having computer problems," Park Jin realized, monitoring the enemy communications. "Our chaos broadcast is spreading through their entire network. They're trying to analyze contradictory information that doesn't make sense." Captain Lee watched the tactical display with growing amazement. A single damaged scout ship was somehow causing confusion among an enemy force that had conquered entire star systems. "Kim, what's our current status?" "Hull damage at 40%, engines running on backup power, and we're completely out of ammunition except for emergency food supplies and cleaning products." "Can we make weapons out of cleaning supplies?" There was a brief pause from engineering. "Give me 5 minutes and I'll find out." As the Endurance continued its insane dance through space, spraying floor cleaner at confused swarm vessels while broadcasting a mixture of pop music and physics lectures, Captain Lee Hyun began to understand what they had discovered. The swarm's greatest strength, their ability to learn and adapt to any threat, had become their weakness when faced with an enemy that refused to make logical sense. Around them, the mighty enemy fleet that had seemed unstoppable was beginning to break apart, their perfect coordination dissolving into chaos as they tried to understand an opponent that seemed determined to violate every rule of rational warfare. Humanity's reputation for stubborn creativity was about to become their most powerful weapon in a fight for the survival of galactic civilization. The Void Swarm's collective mind had conquered 17 star systems by applying perfect logic to every battle. Their computer systems could counter any weapon, predict any attack plan, and develop defenses against any threat they had ever faced. Until today, they had never met an enemy that seemed determined to fight in ways that made no sense at all. Aboard the Endurance, Captain Lee Hyun watched as swarm boarding pods attached themselves to the ship's hull despite Kim Soo's increasingly desperate attempts to stop them. "Captain, they've cut through our hull on decks 4 and 6, she reported from the engineering section. "Enemy soldiers are coming aboard. All crew members start close combat defense," Lee announced over the ship's communication system. Then, more quietly to his bridge crew, "Remember what we discussed. Nothing they expect. Nothing that makes sense." The swarm boarding parties that cut through the Endurance's metal walls were prepared for standard ship combat. They expected energy weapons, organized defensive positions, and predictable military tactics. What they found instead was Petty Officer Choi Won fighting with a welding torch like it was a sword while singing ancient Korean battle songs at the top of his lungs. In the ship's kitchen, Cook Lee So defended her workspace with nothing but boiling water and pure anger. She treated the mechanical invaders like rude customers, attacking them with soup ladles and frying pans while lecturing them about proper table manners and the importance of washing hands before meals. Navigator Lee Min had left his station to join the fight, armed with a fire extinguisher in one hand and an electrical cable wrapped around a wrench in the other. His attacks followed no pattern anyone could recognize. He switched randomly between different makeshift weapons as if he couldn't decide which one worked better. The swarm's shared intelligence, watching through the sensors of its boarding troops, began experiencing something it had never felt before: confusion. Every time it developed a plan to counter the humans' fighting style, they would completely change to something totally different. On the bridge, Communications Officer Park Jin continued his audio attack, now adding live commentary on the boarding battle mixed with random poetry and mathematical problems. The swarm's communication networks, already struggling to process the cultural chaos, began showing signs of serious overload. "Sir," Park Jin reported between broadcasting random facts about Korean cooking, "I'm detecting massive computer activity from the swarm fleet. They're using enormous amounts of processing power just trying to understand what we're doing." Captain Lee fired his sidearm at a swarm warrior while simultaneously trying to solve a word puzzle. Not because it helped him fight, but because Kim Soo had suggested that doing multiple illogical things at once might break the enemy's analysis systems. "Are they learning to counter our tactics?" he asked. "That's exactly the problem, they can't learn from us. Every time they figure out one thing we're doing, we do something completely different. Their learning computers are stuck trying to solve problems that have no solutions." From the engineering section, Kim Soo's voice came through the damaged intercom. "Captain, I'm reading system failures throughout the swarm network. Their shared mind is having trouble processing information that contradicts itself." The larger swarm fleet, still visible on the long-range sensors, was showing increasing signs of breakdown. Ships were moving in confused patterns, and some vessels were actually crashing into each other as their coordination systems failed. Lieutenant Commander Park Dong, leading a repair team on Deck 6, had discovered that singing traditional folk songs while fighting seemed to confuse the swarm warriors' hearing systems. His team was now advancing through the ship while performing what could generously be called a musical concert with weapons. "The enemy boarding parties are moving slower," Lee Min reported, pausing to hit a swarm warrior with his improvised club. "Their reaction times are getting worse." Captain Lee nodded as understanding dawned on him. "They're not just fighting us, they're trying to analyze and categorize everything we do. The more chaotic we get, the more computer power they waste trying to understand us." The battle inside the Endurance continued, but it was unlike any combat in military history. Humans fought with everything from kitchen spoons to modified hair dryers while discussing philosophy, sharing family recipes, and arguing about ancient literature. The swarm warriors, their adaptive combat systems overwhelmed by contradictory information, began making increasingly poor decisions. Some stood perfectly still for long seconds, their processors locked in analysis loops. Others responded to attacks that weren't happening while ignoring real threats right in front of them. On the main display, Captain Lee could see the distant coalition ships that had survived the initial battle. They were keeping a safe distance, watching in amazement as a single human vessel somehow held off boarding parties that had overwhelmed much larger and better-armed ships. "Sir," Park Jin called out, "the surviving coalition fleet is asking for a status report. Admiral Kethvar wants to know what we're doing to the enemy." Captain Lee ducked under a swarm warrior's attack and responded by throwing his coffee cup at its optical sensors. "Tell the Admiral we're conducting an experiment in applied confusion theory." "Should I try to explain our fighting methods?" "What methods?" Captain Lee grinned as Kim Soo emerged from a maintenance tunnel behind two swarm warriors and attacked them with what appeared to be a modified vacuum cleaner. "Tell him we're making everything up as we go along." The truth was exactly that. Every human aboard the Endurance was fighting according to no plan beyond confuse the enemy and try to survive. It was working better than 3 centuries of refined galactic military strategy. As the last boarding party was driven off, mostly by Cook Lee So chasing them with a pot of boiling soup while reciting poetry about spring flowers, the crew of the Endurance looked around at their damaged ship and realized something incredible. They were still alive. More than that, they were actually winning. The Endurance drifted through space like a wounded animal, her metal hull cracked and air leaking from dozens of holes. Captain Lee Hyun stood on a bridge where half the control panels were dark and the other half were held together with emergency tape and desperate hope. "Give me a status report," he called out to his crew. Lieutenant Kim Soo's voice came through the damaged intercom system, crackling with static electricity. "Life support systems at 30%, engines completely offline, weapons are gone. But sir, the good news is that our main reactor is still working." "How well is it working?" "Well enough for one more really crazy idea." Navigator Lee Min looked up from his broken console, its screen flickering with damaged circuits. "Captain, the main swarm fleet is still showing coordination problems. Their formation is completely broken apart. But they're starting to separate the damaged ships, trying to stop whatever we did to them from spreading." Communications Officer Park Jin was hunched over his station, monitoring the chaotic mixture of signals still flooding the space around them. "Sir, I'm detecting something interesting. The swarm network is trying to quarantine all the data we've been broadcasting. They're treating our cultural transmissions like a computer virus." Captain Lee moved to the main window, watching the distant swarm vessels as they struggled to restore order to their ranks. Some ships had gone completely silent, their systems apparently overwhelmed by endless analysis loops. Others were firing randomly at empty space, their targeting systems confused by contradictory programming instructions. They've never encountered anything like humanity, he realized aloud. Their entire advantage is based on logical adaptation. But you can't adapt to pure chaos. Kim Soo's voice crackled through the intercom again. Captain, I've got that crazy idea ready. Remember how we overloaded their analysis systems with contradictory information? Yes, I remember. What if we gave them something really impossible to process? I've been thinking about our reactor. If we dump our entire cultural database directly into their network through a focused transmission, using every bit of power we have left. Park Jin looked up with sudden understanding spreading across his face. You want to give them all of human civilization. Everything at once. Every book, every song, every philosophical argument, every scientific theory, every piece of art, every contradiction we've ever come up with as a species. Kim Soo's excitement was clear even through the damaged communication system. Their shared mind is built for logical consistency. Human culture is beautifully, fundamentally inconsistent. Captain Lee considered what this would mean. What would that do to our reactor? It would overload it completely. The transmission would require every bit of energy we have left. We'd be powerless afterward, drifting in space with no engines or life support. And what would it do to the swarm? There was a long pause. Honestly, sir, I have no idea. Either nothing happens or we completely break their entire collective consciousness. Navigator Lee Min was checking his instruments with growing urgency. Captain, we need to decide quickly. I'm detecting new swarm reinforcements approaching. Fresh ships that weren't affected by our initial chaos broadcasts. Captain Lee looked around his damaged bridge at his exhausted crew. They were down to their final gamble and it might kill them even if it worked. Do it, he decided without hesitation. The next few minutes were a flurry of desperate activity as every remaining crew member worked to prepare humanity's final message to the Void Swarm. Kim Soo rerouted all available power to the communications array. Park Jin compiled their entire cultural database, from ancient poetry to modern scientific papers to children's songs to philosophical writings that argued completely opposite viewpoints. Transmission package ready, Park Jin reported. Sir, this is everything. Every human thought, dream, creation, and contradiction we've ever recorded. The reactor is at critical levels, Kim Soo warned. Once we start this process, there's no way to stop it. Captain Lee took a deep breath and opened a channel to any coalition ships that might be listening. To all surviving fleet vessels monitoring this frequency, this is Captain Lee Hyun of the human ship Endurance. We are about to attempt something that has never been tried before. If we succeed, the threat to galactic civilization may end today. If we fail. He paused, looking around his bridge one final time at the faces of his brave crew. If we fail, remember that humanity refused to surrender, even when we were given the weakest ship in the entire fleet. Beginning transmission now, Park Jin announced. The reactor surge was visible even through the ship's hull as every bit of power the Endurance possessed was channeled into a single, massive broadcast. The transmission lasted exactly 4.7 seconds and contained the complete recorded heritage of human civilization, every song, every story, every scientific discovery, every philosophical argument, every piece of art, and every contradiction that made humanity uniquely, chaotically human. The effect on the swarm network was immediate and devastating. The collective intelligence, evolved for perfect logical consistency, suddenly found itself trying to process concepts like sacrificing for strangers, creating beauty for no practical purpose, believing in contradictory ideas simultaneously, and finding meaning in meaninglessness. The shared consciousness that had conquered star systems through pure rationality encountered human concepts like love, honor, artistic expression, and the deliberate embrace of paradox. Across the entire swarm fleet, ships began shutting down as their collective consciousness experienced something unprecedented. A complete system crash. The network that had connected thousands of vessels in perfect coordination dissolved into chaos as each ship's individual computers tried and failed to reconcile the fundamental contradictions in human thought. The Endurance drifted powerless through space, her crew watching in amazement as the most feared enemy in the galaxy simply stopped working. Swarm vessels hung motionless in the void, their adaptive systems locked in endless loops trying to categorize the uncategorizable. Coalition Fleet, this is Admiral Kethvar, came a transmission on emergency frequencies. We are detecting complete cessation of all swarm activity. All enemy vessels appear to be non-functional. Captain Lee collapsed into his command chair, exhausted but alive. Around him, his bridge crew stared at the displays showing hundreds of swarm ships floating dead in space. "Sir," Park Jin said quietly, "we're receiving priority transmissions from Coalition Command. They want to know exactly what we did." Captain Lee smiled weakly. "Tell them we gave the swarm something they never expected to encounter. Humanity in all its illogical, contradictory, impossible glory." As rescue ships moved to help the powerless Endurance, Captain Lee Hyun looked out at the drifting swarm fleet and understood an important lesson. Sometimes the best way to win an impossible fight is to be too stubborn to realize it's impossible.